What's up, guys? We're back again to another malicious compliance. Let's move on into the story, and then I'll see you in a bit. Sorry, you won't be getting the supervisor position. Why aren't you doing the supervisor work? So, I worked for a company for a few years, got turned down for every promotion, but was still expected to do the extra work because they stopped scheduling anyone to do it. And I thought it would make me look better if I just did it. Covering breaks, checking logs, safety walks, etc. We had 3 department managers who only worked during the day, and a supervisor for the mid-shift, but no management at night. A position opened up for the job, and I put in for it, but then was closed because of labor and budget issues, and lack of applications. A few weeks later, they complained I wasn't doing enough production and needed to focus more on my work. So I eventually just stopped doing the extra work and let the department fall to crap. We got pinged from the regional manager for missing too many safety walks. We got pinged by health and safety for not having properly filled out the logs, and customer complaints about lack of service due to employees being on breaks. Management flipped out and said this would probably prevent me from getting a promotion in the future. When I asked why, they told me that these were part of my job duties. Me. But you told me to focus on productivity, not any extra duties. These are part of a supervisor role, not mine. Management. You've been doing them for months now. Why did you stop? Me. You told me to focus on production. Management. Well, until we find someone to work at night, they have to be covered. Me. Wow. So one of the managers will have to close every night? That's rough. Management. Come on, we're all a team. You can help us out, right? Me. Sorry, I'm not comfortable doing extra duties beyond my role without proper training and compensation. Paintball Producer failed to list experience advice. Has his rule abused and removed from the game. Backstory. I play paintball with an established scenario team that travels all over the USA, playing large scenario games, and have been flown to Europe by our sponsor to play over there as well. We as a team have existed for over 25 years and have played hundreds of games together. These scenario games typically last for 8 to 26 hours, played over 100 or more acres, and consist of usually 2 or more sides, with upwards to hundreds, sometimes rarely thousands, of players on the field at once. We have consulted and run our own games during our years. Needless to say, we have a lot of experience, and when we're invited to games, we typically make some suggestions to the field if they have a rule that is easily abused and can break the game they are running. We usually do our best to explain the interpretation, as we don't want to ruin anyone's fun with poor execution. There's a standard set of rules that a lot of experienced producers will borrow from, as it has been well played tested. One of the aspects of most scenario games is the field role of a medic, a player who can revive a player who's been hit, provided some simple conditions are met. This allows players a second chance on the field, without having to walk off and wait for reinsertion into the game. It can help add some fun to the game, and usually helps prevent cheating, as a player can attempt to get healed and keep playing instead of having to deal with moral dilemma of sometimes long walks off the field to wait to be reinserted if they are eliminated by the result of a bonehead decision. It also allows for some pretty aggressive moves on the field, as the player can sometimes get a second chance, usually after discussion with the producer, and if our interpretation is correct, most producers will heed our advice, because it's easier to fix a rule before the game starts than after. Set up for the MC. Prior to arriving at this particular field, we had read the rules that were published beforehand, and after arrival, had met with the producer to explain our concerns for his interpretation of the standard medic role. Usually, the medic have to wipe off the old hit, as to not confuse other players with what is recent and an eliminating hit, and to prevent the player, if shady, from claiming "it's an old hit" and continuing playing. Usually, medics have to limit numbers of times they can revive a player and a brief window of time to which they can heal. Medic also usually are not allowed to heal players who have been hit in the head, as it also provides a taste of realism to the event. Players waiting for a medic are not allowed to wander around and have to wait out their time limit at where they were hit. This particular producer had decided to skip tradition and developed his own rule. Simply put, the medic just had to touch the player in question to consider them healed. No other conditions or procedure. We attempted to discuss the reason why this was a bad idea, but was informed that the producer was an experienced producer and it cannot be abused. Anything else is overkill. That we were unfounded in our concerns. We decided we weren't going to get any further with him and left to prepare for the game. The MC. During the early part of the game, we were making a push up a well-defended hill. One of our players had advanced too far to get a prop, a piece of equipment used to the story of the game, a MacGuffin, and gotten himself hit while making a grab for it. We needed the prop to complete a different task on the field later. We were outnumbered and in a poor location, but we had a medic player with us who was enjoying our shenanigans. We yelled to hit the player to hold his location and for someone to yell for the medic, so the other players would know he wasn't just laying there. We called a referee over to explain our plan and ask for rules clarification for our interpretation. He confirmed and validated our plan was within the rules. We implemented it. What we did was form a very tight circle of players standing shoulder to shoulder around the medic so that no shots could make it past our wall of players. The medic was to continuously move his hands over our backs to heal us, since he only had to touch us, while we advanced up the hill to retrieve our fallen player and the prop, with everyone ready, including the referee in tow to eliminate the medic if he got hit, which would have ended our plan. We made our march up the hill, enclosed the hit player in our wall so the medic could touch him, and then proceeded back down to our original gathering point. Those of us in the front took a lot of paint hits and pain, but we knew going into it. The medic was not hit as confirmed by the referee. Our plan succeeded. This resulted in much yelling and complaining by the opposing force. The referee called over a few refs nearby to defuse the situation, while also explaining that what we did was well within the rules and with the referee's blessing. The fallout. Most of us, being low on supplies, decided to head off the field, leaving another player to move the prop to where it needed to go and continue the game. By the time we got back to our tent off field, the head ref was waiting for us, as he had received complaints from other players, and for us to explain what had happened. We explained our side of it, the referee involved, and the situation. The head ref confirmed with the field ref, and by the end of it was cracking up. He made an executive decision and radioed to the producer and the on-field refs that medics' powers on the field are to be revoked until further notice. The producer eventually came over to apologize, and the medic role was entirely removed from the game for the rest of the event, as it was easier than reworking them during the game. The new manager. I work in a call center, usually government research things like doing surveys on behalf of government agencies like the Centers for Disease Control or Departments of Health. If the contract isn't going to reach a certain number of completes, then the contract is most likely over a certain period of time, anywhere from just a couple of days to over a year of gathering data, in which case they are paid by completes. For example, if the contract that has to be enacted over a period of time, then typically would get paid considerably more than getting 15,000 complete surveys over opposed to 5,000. So, completes are a big deal, but all the senior interviews, site managers, supervisors, basically anyone working there for more than a month, understand that dial rate is extremely important, and in the eyes of our site manager, was more important than completion rate. To put in perspective, and there aren't any statistics, obviously, if the company generates 100,000 random phone numbers, say 45% of those aren't even going to be in service, in which case they get taken off the list. Another 35% might be people who don't even answer, and after however many ignored calls they get taken off the list, 5% might be a business or non-residential, and in most, but not all cases, they get taken off the list. This would leave 15% of people who answer the phone. And that's probably generous. In which case, most of those people are either going to decline, turn irate, or not even qualify for the study, in which case they're going to get taken off the list. This is quite obvious to anyone who's been working there for longer than a month, or actually had it explained to them. So this is tens of thousands of dead numbers that we have to shift through. It doesn't take much thought to realize people with high dial rates will shift through these numbers faster, leaving good numbers for people who are more likely to get completes. My manager, the site manager, going into his 80s, started having health issues and probably should have retired long ago, had to retire because of an injury. He couldn't train a new site manager, so they opted to train a new guy straight out of college. I know, how typical, at the main site, basically on the opposite end of the country. When he actually comes around, he comes in professionally, trying to leave a good impression and show respect. Then he settles in and starts reading into everyone's work and sees production and says he sees some critical issues that he needs to address, that there's going to be some changes, and he will be transparent with everyone. I wasn't really concerned because I placed into a study for my high dial rate, a study being done by the company I work for. I was one of the 4 people across all sites that were placed in this study. I assume they didn't want to invest too many interviewers into a study they didn't directly profit from. For the next year, they wanted to generate sample in different ways, trying to find a way to get the most efficiency out of the sample they generate. I don't really know the details of what they were changing, but I do know that I was being paid double for the same work. Basically less work, because if someone answered the phone, I would just say, "Oh, I'm sorry, is this a business? Sorry, I have the wrong number." Then I hung up and write down what they said. So basically, I felt pretty secure. Well, the next week rolls round, and I'm the first one called into his office. My supervisor looks just surprised as I was. I go in, and before I even sit down, he begins with, "So, I've noticed you haven't had a single complete in months, but before that, it was several per day. What's that about?" I say that I was placed in a study, and before I can get further, he says, "I don't care what study you're in or how slow it is. There's no excuse for not having a single complete in months." I say because of my dial rate, I was placed in a study, and he cuts me off again. "Dial rate means nothing. Sure, if you go through more numbers, you're more likely to come across respondents more often, but your dial rate means nothing if you don't get completes." I just blurt out, "I was placed in a study because of my fast dial rate. It isn't a survey, there are no completes." As fast as I can, because I knew he was just gonna cut me off again. Now, I'm not sure if he was just not listening or simply didn't care, because his response was, "That's not an excuse. There is no excuse for an interviewer to not get completes." This is where the malicious compliance kicks in. I was quite dumbfounded that this brand new guy, still learning the ropes, would come in and act like he knows exactly what he needs to do, and would really risk making such big changes to the leading site right off the bat. But I was done with it. I knew the site manager couldn't just fire someone who's been working there for over a year, and that the supervisors are supposed to be consulted. Basically, after your first year, you get promoted from interviewer to senior interviewer. Comes with a 50-cent raise. I know, woo! But you are offered benefits, and the supervisor and site manager come together, and the supervisors must all agree with the termination, and the termination has to be recorded. As much as I know, if any supervisor was there or any other manager would realize it was a mistake. I was just done with it and asked him if he was firing me. And he did. As I'm walking out of his office, my supervisor is waiting for me and said, "You got fired, didn't you?" I told him yes, and he asks, "It's because you're completes, isn't it?" I told him, "Yep. And apparently being on a study that doesn't have completes is no excuse for having no completes." Within the hour, my supervisor calls me and tells me that the project manager, basically the big guys that go out looking for contracts and organize the studies, is flying in tomorrow, and that I'm going to be paid for the day, that my firing wasn't processed correctly, and wants me to come in tomorrow. I go in the next day, and I come into the manager's office, and there's the supervisor, the new manager, and the project manager. The project manager begins immediately. He asks why I was fired. The manager says, "It came to my attention that he hasn't gotten a single complete for 4 months, and that I believe they were inadequate results." The project manager then says, "So you fired the man with the highest dial rate out of all the interviewers of every site, a man that I handpicked myself to take part in an important study on behalf of the company, without consulting a single supervisor because of the results you believe are inadequate?" I don't know how much of this was just him trying to make me feel better, making the manager feel like an idiot, was honest, or a combination of them, but it made me feel a bit more appreciated. The manager was apologizing, saying he didn't know that, and that he was genuinely trying to do what he thought was best. This is where I chimed in. I said, "You're right, you didn't know, but you would have if you listened to me before firing me. You would have known if you had talked to any of the 5 supervisors in the room next to yours. You didn't know, you didn't listen, you didn't ask, but you still felt comfortable changing something that was working exceptionally well already. If anything was inadequate, it was that." I think I pretty much just summed up the entire problem right there, because the conversation at that point is kind of just repetitive. But they ended up firing him. The supervisors went back to work, and the project manager told me to go get some lunch or something, and I should come back in a half hour, and that I'll have my job back, and that he'll see what else he can do for me. When I come back, the manager has 2 contracts he hands me. An employment contract first, that is basically just my job with a $2 raise. He was also upfront with me, and said that I am liable for compensation for wrongful termination, and that if I want to get a lawyer, I should, but that it was a pretty obvious choice. The second contract was a week of paid vacation and an effing Cadillac, in return that I don't sue them for wrongful termination. Apparently, they offered the new manager a car because they were employing him in a state he didn't know and would need a mode of transportation. But being that he got fired, his contract got canceled and it's no longer his car. They were going to give me a check for a lump sum of money, but the CEO decided that since the car was mostly paid for, and terminating the contract on the car would be more expensive than just paying for the car, he wanted to see if I would take the car instead of cash, being that the car is worth way more than any settlement I would have gotten. Basically a win-win. They don't have to pay out as much to fix the issue, and I get a car that probably would have been getting dusty in some company parking garage. Not that I would have sued, I try to be a fair person, and it would have been unfair to punish a company for an individual's actions, especially when that individual went against company guidelines. Of course I took the car and vacation. Alright guys, I hope you enjoyed the story, and if you did, consider subscribing and make sure you hit that bell as well, because we got new releases coming out every single day. Also, if you really liked it, maybe consider liking and hitting that share button. Anyways, I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.